Hi, my name is Martin Dyson, and welcome to another pre-conference interview for Business by Design. Business by Design is a conference running from the 1st to the 3rd of November with workshops on the 5th of November, which is entirely focused on helping design grow in its maturity and its confidence with business. There is a challenge for us within design and a call that people have been having for designers to have a seat at the table, to have the right kind of influence that they want in order to be able to get the great impact that we know we can have in the world to actually happen through the organizations that we work in. And there is a belief that we have, and the reason that we are running this conference, that we need as designers to be able to grow in our business acumen, in our business confidence, and in our maturity with those kind of conversations in order to be able to have that impact. And that's what this conference is all about. We've got 3 days of virtual stages, and then we've got a 4th day of workshops. And today I'm joined by one of our speakers who's going to be joining us on day 3, and that is Ryan Rumsey. And in a second, I'm going to bring Ryan into this conversation and ask him to introduce himself. But let me tell you just a little bit about Ryan. Ryan is the author of a book that I think many of you will have seen published by Envision called Business Thinking for Designers. And I think that is just one of the most useful books that I've seen come out for design leaders and emerging design leaders to really try and get their head around what it means to become a design leader in today's business environment. Ryan also is a CEO of Second Wave Dive, which he's going to tell us a little bit about in a second when I ask him to introduce himself. He has been working for 20 years in Apple, Electronic Arts, USAA, Nestle, Comcast, and he's got great experience in developing high-performing teams and organizations. And it is this background that he's distilled into Business Thinking by Design and into his company Second Wave. So we're really honored to have you with us at the conference, Ryan, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what you're going to be contributing on day 3, which is our executive track. But before we get into that, would you mind just sharing with everybody that's watching, how did you get to this point where you're at, where you're writing a book on business thinking for designers, where you've launched this company, Second Wave Dive? How did you get here?
That's a good little journey. I think for a long time, I worked for organizations where I was benefiting from a lot of maturity around me, not just within design, but sort of lots of maturity around how they approach decision making in general. Apple, for example, was just this really high maturity kind of organization. And when I left Apple, I moved to other companies that had high maturity as well, but in very different ways. And I think one of the things that I struggled with as a sort of a leader, somebody that was asked to be, what we now would call the first designer, or now the person responsible for building and scaling a team, was that a lot of the sort of industry guidance that I was seeing given out there of speaking in this particular way about design was not effective for me in those roles. My colleagues would say, yes, great, we've heard this, but not really sort of change their behaviors and beliefs or really their processes to really then kind of move away from the status quo. And so I think the book sort of started forming. I attended the first version of a small conference called the Design Leadership Camp with these amazing design executives from around the globe. There were just about 30 of us. And I noticed that most people were working at these brilliant companies that shared all these case studies, and they would talk about design kind of in the same way. And I felt strange because I was thinking more about, how to use spreadsheets or how to use the comfortable dialogues and settings that my colleagues use to actually get them to think in a different way. But I think mostly the book came about because despite all this industry guidance, most of my peers were really struggling, almost in a way, shaming themselves for not having made more progress than they had.
Mhm.
And so I just thought, I think there are other ways. There are, not better ways, but just different ways that we can approach how we, mature our influence, show impact, all that kind of stuff. And so that was the kind of basis for this. And the
Interesting.
reason it's called business thinking is because, in my experience, a lot of the MBAs are not MBAing.
Right.
That is to say, what we traditionally think of as good business practices is
Mhm.
not actually how a lot of decisions are made.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it almost felt, I grew up in New Jersey, so it almost felt like the mafia, like, the Italian mafia, this is how we do business, was very different than
Uh-huh.
maybe how business was taught. And so that's where this sort of title of business thinking came from.
I like it. I like it. And one of the things I like about the book and your work is that it, it it integrates for people. And I think that there has been this othering. I've said this before. We do this othering when we go, we're design, and then there is the business. And it's actually something that happens in organizations a lot. You will find people who are in engineering and saying the business. And what I think is really interesting then is then everybody other than engineering is in the business. So we're in the business. So
Yes.
we other everybody by saying the business. So I'm really interested in this idea of when will we admit that design is a business capability? We are the business, just like
Uh,
everybody
uh,
else is
um,
the business.
yes. And the way I like to talk about it and frame it is, most of us are paid employees.
Yeah.
We are paid by organizations who are trying to, achieve some type of strategy, look for competitive advantage, and they've paid us, and they do pay us well to help them do that,
Mhm,
or to identify risks in doing
mhm,
that. And I think that is just for generally any employee.
mhm,
That when you're paid to do a service, it's very different than creating art,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That you might do on your own to sort of get people to question.
Mhm,
And so, in that sense, yes, we're all part of the business, but also, if you put business in air quotes,
yeah.
there's never been an organization I've worked at where it's like, that's the business. And even my business colleagues would say the business, and I would look at them and kind of go like, but you're the CIO, right? Or
Yeah.
you're like in the C-suite, aren't you the
Mhm,
business? Like, and so it
mhm,
was always this term that felt very soft,
mhm,
that we couldn't quite pin down.
mhm.
And I think between those two things, it's just this acknowledgement that, like, well, wait, I'm paid to play a part in this. I have there are expectations of me as an employee,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's where it sort of starts.
And of course, design's got it's certainly the last 20 years, and especially if we're talking about digital design, there's a strong agency component and consulting component to
Oh
how
yeah.
that's been delivered for clients over the last 20 years as the pace of change has been so fast. A lot of organizations have had to tend to use external help, and so a lot of people have grown in their design careers being the external, and have carried that into the in-house environment where perhaps industrial design and some physical product design disciplines have got a longer history of being embedded inside the business, because when you're making something and that's your business, then you have the designers alongside the makers, and they do
Right.
together. We've got a whole separate panel with the Glasgow School of Art, Loughborough
Mm.
Design School, and Phillips and myself, and a recent graduate from the Glasgow School of Art, where we're going to be talking about the role of design education in helping with
Hmm.
designers' business maturity on the way in. Um, you're going to be talking on day 3. which is our executive track. So we've got practitioners. We've got a focus on practitioners and what the practical tools and frameworks are that you can start to use now to increase your business confidence as a practitioner. We've got
Right.
day 2 where we're looking at managers and leaders and how they can change their management and leadership practice and style to help their teams better integrate with what the right impacts are to have within the business. And then day 3 is for an executive focus, where we're looking at the changing nature of the role of the design executive that's
Right.
ultimately in charge of design person. So what's your hope for what you're going to bring for us on day 3?
Right. So I think what you're talking about, right, in the grand scheme of things, is design has made tremendous progress. You talked about a lot of people coming from agency. I had the sort of, maybe I guess, fortunate circumstance where I have been in-house
Yeah.
since 2005.
Wow.
And working on weird things. So whether I was at Apple or Electronic Arts or any of these companies, I was
Mhm.
always in house building
Mhm.
these functions from scratch.
Great.
And I think there's tremendous success there, right? There's
Mhm.
like 250,000 employed designers. Wonderful, right? We've made all this progress, and I still think there's this big gap.
Right.
And the gap is that really, despite all this, despite the number of companies now employing executive designers,
Yeah.
a lot of companies, and I think maybe organizational leaders, C-suite people, are still indicating that they don't believe design is reaching its full potential.
Mhm.
And what I would say is yes, but I also look at, despite all this important progress, much of that C-suite leadership in an organization is still made up of the same voices and profiles,
Mhm.
still made up of the same behaviors and beliefs that, pre-digital even. And a lot of the decisions and policies are based on all that. And if
Yeah.
we look at how even the tech industry still evaluates value,
Mhm.
it's still basically just revenue, right? We
Yeah.
look at all of our favorite startups and that we just worry about whether they've IPO'd.
Yeah.
And so for me, I go, gosh, it's despite all this, it's sort of the same as it ever was. And I think for an executive leader, or really the future of executive leaders, I think we have to understand that we're quite naive in how rooted those beliefs and policies are.
Mhm.
And I think we often are pushing hard in the wrong direction,
Right.
or using a lot of the wrong tools for the right problems.
Mm.
And so when we do that, I think, and this is maybe getting into the talk where I may evoke some feelings from people. I think we're still propping up the existing beliefs of what good is.
Right.
And so what I see, what I'm going to share is there's this shift that I think needs to happen.
Okay.
And I think there's this wave of us that were design executives, and maybe it's the Gen X in us, where we kind of approached everything as almost a victim sort of place.
Mhm.
And what I see now is I see the need for the next wave of leader, or even the current leader, to, I'm going to use agency in a different way, to
Okay.
really claim our agency. For so
Excellent.
long, we've talked about this seat at the table,
Yeah.
and a seat at the table without power is a trap.
Mhm.
I heard that phrase on Twitter and I was like, that is exactly how it's framed, right? Because
Yeah.
if we want to effectively create change, we actually need to claim our agency.
Yes.
Right? Because if you don't own power as a VP, you're maybe just a director in VP clothing, right?
Excellent.
And I think if we're talking about creating equitable systems and sustainable systems and environmental systems, that is messy and time consuming,
Mhm.
often very frustrating, but it all is about claiming our agency. I
That's
also
super
think
interesting.
I also think that when you get to these levels, it's about shaping policy and people, not
Mhm.
pixels.
Excellent.
Uh, you're going to be spending more time in the boardroom and with spreadsheets than you are with Figma or design reviews. And
Yeah.
you you need to know how to navigate the existing system to change the existing system.
Yeah.
Lastly, we can talk about the perceptions of us. I think right now everybody expects us to create Figma files, to create journey maps, to talk about research and talk about all these things. Those are baseline now. Design operations, design systems, these are baseline expectations. In order to change the conversation, to get organizations to think of us differently, we actually have to exceed those expectations. And what I can tell you is that when walking into a boardroom and speaking through the frameworks or the dialogues that they communicate with and they understand, it exceeds all their expectations of what we're talking about. And
Yeah.
so that's what I'm going to sort of be talking about. That's a
That's
lot of
excellent.
focus of Second Wave Dive, is really reclaiming our collective agency. And I think my role is as an educator, that we need to go back to school, that even traditional programs like MBAs are teaching maybe an old model. Traditional design education is perhaps teaching an old model. And so that's a lot of my focus now with Second Wave Dive, is how do we sort of remix our education, go back and spend some time deliberately practicing new skills before we're in front of the CFO for the first time, right?
That's great. And this is such an important role that people like yourself play in this, because what you do is you've got this opportunity, and I think you and I both do this, which is to take a step back and look and see what's going on and try and synthesize what that is and what that might mean and lay out these new challenges for people. Our hope for this conference is that we've also got some of the speakers who are in that challenge right now and who are living some of what you've been talking through. I really like that idea of agency. I think that is a language that that we can feel and feel connected to. I used to talk to people about accountability, that as the formal thing that happens in an organization, because the CEO is accountable for everything ultimately, and then gives bits of that accountability to people around the table. And I think it was Katie Dill at Leading Design that said, she had to go through multiple cycles of learning where the CEO said to her, "Do you know what we do at this table?" Because it's not, as you've just said, Ryan, it's not all the things about creative direction. It is about executive decision making across the organization.
That's right.
And so trying to turn up there with your superpower of design thinking, and designers thinking, with that superpower, but knowing that the conversation and the decisions you're making are not necessarily about design.
Right. And I think, Katie has talked about this well over the years, that when we talk about the chief design officer role, or that VP role, where you're now an executive, one of the fundamental shifts is you are now responsible for part of that strategic plan. So it's really as the functional strategy, which means you can't point to anybody else and say, well, we were just following your plan. No, the role is different. You are now in a place where you have to come up with a strategic plan, and you are accountable for that being executed. And then if you have directors and managers, their roles are to, come up with a strategy of that tactical execution of your plan. And I think we are just very unprepared for that switch, to go from, okay, I can do the tactical of somebody else's, to now I'm on the hook for creating a strategic plan.
This is why I think that you should only be called a chief something if you're sitting on the board. Something reports to the CEO, and that is it. There's one other exception, which I do think that there is a time when you can use the term chief design officer to mean they are our chief designer. And that means that actually they've been given an accountability from up above, somewhere through into the organization, and they said the vision, you are accountable for the vision, you are the chief designer.
That's right.
But I think we've convoluted those things, and some people in coming into being given more senior roles have said, and I want the title to be chief design officer, and it doesn't help.
That's right.
Again,
Or
yeah.
head of design or product, VP or,
But it's all right if
whatever
you're
it is.
saying head of or VP,
Yeah.
because then there's other structures around. But a chief something is a role is a
Yes.
role at the exco, and therefore the
Yes.
accountability buck stops absolutely there. I think that's a really important thing, actually. And there's a number of people that I've met now through this conference and through the podcast as well, whose role titles are not chief design officer, but they are the most senior executive. They do have the accountabilities.
Right.
The role title didn't matter, but they've
That's
taken
right.
the agency that you've talked about, Ryan. Yeah.
Yes.
Look,
And
yeah,
yeah.
go on, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's so important that they make that change when they get to that point, right? And they see that, because that's what the company expects, and they've got like maybe about 18 months to be able to make that pivot before some other things happen.
Well, look, I'm really looking forward to your contribution to the day. You're going to be, in and out across the conference, seeing some of the speakers and some of the contributions that are being made. I believe that we'll have a little bit of Q&A after your session as well, so you're going to be able to share your thoughts on all of this, also some reflections on what's been happening during the conference and what we've seen coming up. So it's going to be a really great session with you, Ryan. I'm really glad that you're able to join us, share some of your experience and some of your thinking, and lay some of these challenges down for all of us as design leaders going forward.
I'm really looking forward to it, Martin. There's such a great lineup, and just to be a participant with that too is fantastic as a speaker. So thank you so much for having me. It's going to be a fun day.
So thank you again, Ryan. So just to remind everybody, that's the 1st to the 3rd of November for our live virtual stages, and the 5th of November for our workshops, where there's going to be some frameworks put into action and things for you to really take away from that. You'll find all the information you need to in links surrounding this video, businessxdesign.io. Go on in there and get signed up, and we really hope to see you there. Once again, Ryan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin.